night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. Opened the earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts. Screaming white-hot flames and agony, she challenged millions of headhunters, dragging and ripping apart impossible tender moments of time, shipping vessels of history, ancient history, destroying the fabric, the godlike claw of destiny of a people with a gun, a knife, a cannon, building the hideous wall of blood called slavery. With burning eyes and black skin, torn skin, whipped skin, degraded skin, smashed skin, dehumanized skin, dehumanized skin. Strong enough to bring a fee, strong enough to be free, to be free, to be free. Strong enough to bring a fee, strong enough to be free.
Greetings and welcome back as always. Thank you all for your patience. Thought it would be a great idea for you to hear a little bit more from the late greats Gaston Neal with his poetry and Fred Foss there on tenor, two of my dear, dear friends who have become ancestors. With that being said, again, thank you all so much for your patience. A prominent Al Jazeera journalist who had previously been threatened by Israel was killed along with 4 colleagues in an Israeli airstrike on Sunday in an attack condemned by journalists and rights groups. Israel's military said it targeted and killed Ahmed Al Sharah, alleging he had headed a Hamas militant cell and was involved in rocket attacks on Israel. And of course, no evidence to support that fiction was ever presented. We must challenge the lie. We must always challenge the lie. How do we do it? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historical context in which most of these events take place. Let's get right to my guest. On today's episode, the issue before us is the genocide continues unabated. In an interview with Axios yesterday, President Trump provided backing for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to escalate in Gaza, suggesting that Israel needed to ramp up the pressure on Hamas. What does all of this really mean? My guest is an award-winning independent journalist, analyst, and commentator. He's the creator of FreePalestine.video. He's also the host of Wartime Cafe, which you can find at FreePalestine.video. Laith Marouf, as always, my dear brother, welcome back.
Great to be with you, Wilmer. Thank you for having me.
5 Al Jazeera journalists were killed by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza City on Sunday. Among them, 28-year-old correspondent Ahmed Al Sharah, who had reported prominently on the war since its outset. The 4 other journalists, I'm not even going to try to, I don't want to butcher their names in their passing. If you have their names before you, then please, but I want to pay them nothing but respect. So if you have their names, please state them. This is the most recent atrocity, and there's been a total silence from the Western press. Laith Marouf.
Yes, the number of journalists that have now been killed by the Zionists is almost reaching 260. This is above and beyond the number of media workers, meaning all those people who provide the logistics and transportation for those journalists that also have been targeted. And this is the largest number of journalists to be killed in any battlefield in recorded history. In fact, it is more than the number of journalists killed in all the wars past the World War combined. And so this can show you how much of a deliberate act it has been, the targeting of journalists in Palestine and in Lebanon, and all across Palestine, not only in Gaza. And this has been normalized by the mass media in the West and the collaborationist, propagandist media workers in the West. I can't even call them journalists. We saw the front page of Bild, the German largest newspaper, justifying the killing of Anas al-Sharif and the other journalists as terrorists belonging to Hamas. And I believe this headline and that of the National Post in Canada, and other newspapers and television stations and radio stations in the West that carried this propaganda by the Zionists as a fact on their headlines, that makes the owners of these media outlets, including the Bild and the National Post in Canada, and their editorial boards, all guilty of justifying and supporting the committing of genocide, and specifically the targeting of journalists. And in any day after the liberation of Palestine, the editorial board of the Bild, the editorial board of the National Post in Canada, and others that followed with this headline should be put on trial and found guilty and hung in the public square. This is the least that should happen to these journalists that justified the killing of the 260 somewhat reporters and journalists in our region since the beginning of the genocide in Palestine. I say this, and I think that all of this should help people take action. The viewers, the consumers of media in the West are not hopeless people. You have the ability to do what the women and children of Chiapas in Mexico, in the south of Mexico, did, which is to occupy the broadcasters, to occupy the radio and television station and the newspaper. If women and children in Chiapas can do that under the threat of Mexican military intervention, why cannot the citizens of the United States, of the UK, of Europe, of Canada take over their propagandist machines and bring them to the will of the people of Canada and the United States and Europe, where the majority of the citizens in those countries oppose the genocide being committed against the Palestinians and oppose the policies of their own states supporting it.
As I understand it, the journalists were in a tent camped out in front of a hospital. So not only is the atrocity the murdering of journalists, but again, in front of a hospital. So if other innocent, and they were all innocent, but if others who were not targeted were impacted by this, then all that does is just compound the atrocity.
Remember that this is not the first time that the Zionists targeted journalists in tents outside hospitals. This is the umpteenth time. And there was a famous event like that a few months ago, where one of the journalists in the tent burned alive in front of everybody that broadcasted. There's even, imagine how vile and devilish the Zionists have been in targeting journalists. There's nothing I can see that that can encompass the severity of these acts. There was a journalist that was targeted and injured and survived, and then was taken to hospital. And the Israelis flew a drone through the window of his hospital room and assassinated him. This is how, for months now, for a year and 11 months, the Zionists have been purposefully, openly, gleefully targeting journalists in Palestine and in the region as a whole. Even the 6 journalists that were killed in Lebanon, our teams of Free Palestine TV were targeted multiple times, including other teams of other journalists that we saw here in the south of Lebanon, also targeted. So this is a norm, and the journalists, quote unquote, in the West, that still till today cannot say that the Zionists are deliberately targeting Palestinian journalists. The journalist associations and unions, including mine, where I belong to the Union of Canadian freelance journalists, who have yet to issue one statement of condemnation, calling the killer by their name, and saying that the Zionists are the most dangerous ever enemy of journalism that humanity has known. This is the least I expect from journalist unions and associations and journalists themselves. Those journalists that work at CBC and CNN and Fox and others that know the truth and are still working in these despicable institutions that are justifying the killing of Palestinian journalists, what are they doing? They are guilty themselves. Don't tell me it's about your livelihood or a job. I don't care about your livelihood or a job. You working in an institution that justifies a journalistic, quote unquote, institution that justifies the killing of Palestinians makes you guilty of a war crime and abetting and aiding a war crime, and you should be hung yourself in a public square. This is how the least that we can say about how decrepit the profession of journalism in the West is today.
I'm gonna give it an honest attempt to pronounce these names because I think people need to hear them, even though it'll probably be butchered by me. Mohammed Creiq. How do you pronounce Qreiqeh? Laith.
Qreiqeh.
Creiqeh. Oh, thank you, Mohammed Creiqeh. Okay. Ibrahim Zaher, Momin Aliwa, and driver and cameraman Mohammed Nufal were the journalists that were most recently brutally murdered by the Zionist state. There's a report now backing Netanyahu. Trump suggests Israel needs to ramp up military pressure on Hamas. In an interview with Axios yesterday, Trump provided backing for Netanyahu's plans to escalate in Gaza, suggesting that Israel needed to ramp up the pressure on Hamas. Laith, this is what, to me, one of the examples of the story is not really in what is said. The story is in what is not said. And what I mean by that is, and we've discussed this before, we've been told all the way up through the 7th of October about the prowess of the Israeli Defense Force, that all they do is traverse the globe, kicking ass and taking names. And so, first of all, the fact that now over a year into this process, they still have to talk about going in again indicates to me that they're not nearly as strong as we were led to believe, or at least we were told they were. But more importantly, they can't do this without the United States. So when I say what the story is in what's not being said is, if they decide to push this further, Donald Trump has got to put American forces into the process, and what that means, whether it's just logistical or whatever that might be, it's going to be. But your thoughts?
Yeah, look, it's clear that there's a huge difference between the Hollywood propaganda image of what Israel is and its prowess, and how the Western public was conditioned for 80 years to repeat over and over that Jews are the most moral peoples on the planet. Jews are the funniest, the smartest, the best doctors, the best lawyers, the best engineers, the best Nobel Peace Prize winners. That Zionist, Israeli, martial arts are better than the martial arts of all the nations that had martial arts before the Israelis decided that they have a martial art, that they're going to just steal everybody else's and call it theirs, like they call hummus theirs. Like basically bagels are the best thing that ever was invented under the sun. So this is a conditioning that unfortunately most citizens in the West have kind of accepted. Remember in that movie Independence Day when what's his name, Will Smith is at the last scene and the rabbi says, come and all pray with me, and he says, I'm not Jewish, and he tells them not everybody's perfect. That's how the Western public has been conditioned for decades like that. And the reality is that there is no more cowardice fighter on this planet than an Israeli fighter. There is no more perverted fighter on this planet than an Israeli fighter. That there is no way that Israel would have existed one day since 1948 if it wasn't for the whole enslavement of Western wealth, Western media, Western military into maintaining this colony. You know, there has not been one war that Israel fought on its own. Every war that it fought against the Palestinians and the Arabic peoples in the region has been a war of all the West combined against the modern Red Indians. Okay, there's no parity between a cowboy and an Indian in terms of one has guns, the other has arrows, one has courage, and one has technology and a supply of weapons that is devilishly unending. This is how Israel conquered the Palestinians and the Arabs in 1948. There wasn't a real Arab armies fighting Israel. Every Arab state was under occupation in 1948 except Syria. And they want to give you that, you know, Hollywood propaganda situation of the Jews fought the hordes of the Arabs. Whoa, it was a great day. No, there was Red Indian Palestinians with rifles from World War I fighting whole mechanized armies delivered by the West to Israel in 1948 to crush the Palestinians under the tanks, as they did in Gaza. So this is the reality. If the West ceases to supply Israel for one day with weapons, with money, with political cover, it will cease to exist without the intervention of anyone outside Palestine. The people of Palestine themselves, one child in the streets of Jenin, in the streets of Nablus, in the streets of Gaza, can defeat a whole Israeli battalion. That's the truth. Because of one is the people of the land, the other is a privileged garbage collected from all around Europe, thrown with the idea that they are a chosen people with an endless supply of weapons. That's the difference between the two.
Now that's something to contemplate. Syria, U.S. to discuss Suwaida killings in Amman talks, but Druze aren't invited. The U.S. official urges restraint in Suwaida. And you at Wartime Cafe, episode 33, I think it might have been your latest episode, you interview Lillian Hamza, Understanding Druze Factions. Who is she? What's the focus of the interview? And talk about what's going on in Suwaida.
Lillian Hamza is a great author from Lebanon. She belongs to the Unitary Muslim sect, or what is colloquially known as Druze. You know, we sat down with her because the buzzword of Druze and the war in Syria, the continued genocide of religious and ethnic minorities in the country at the hands of the HTS. There was a need to give the audience, specifically in Western societies, an English, primer onto the realities of the Unitary Muslims, the different factions, who is, the most prominent movements in different countries like Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon. And she did a really good job. So I recommend people watching this. And I also want to note that we did a tour with her in the field in another episode of our Lebanon Field Reports, where we talk about the long-term history, the beginnings of what we know as the Druze people, and the current situation. So those two reports combined should be able to give a holistic view for anyone that wants to understand much more details about the history and the current situation. Having said that, I want to demystify these things. It's very important for us because it seems the Western media and the Wahhabi media and the Zionist media deliberately use the word Druze when referring to this Muslim sect instead of their own preferred describer, which is Unitary Muslims. And I think it has to do with two propaganda ploys. One is because the word Druze and Jews rhyme. So on the one hand, this puts a subliminal message in the Western audience that somehow Druze are related to Jews. On the other, it's to purposefully allow the Wahhabi takfiris, which means people that call others heretic, to extract the Unitary Muslims from Islam and say that they are heretics. And this way, this all plays into the bigger propaganda ploy that says somehow that the Zionist colony is going to be the protector of the Druze. You see? So that's one thing that we need to understand. The other is that the Unitary Muslims, quote unquote, Druze of Syria were a crucial part in the story of the liberation of Syria from French occupation. In fact, my great-grandfather, Muhammad Said Al-Arfi, who was the mufti, meaning the religious judge of Deir ez-Zor in the northeast of Syria during the Ottoman rule, was one of the comrades of the leader of the Druze in Syria, Sultan Amir al-Atrash from Suwaida. And those two, traditionally, if you understand history, the upper class or the merchant class has a lot of interest in stability. So they join revolutions after the fact. And it is the edges of the society and or the geographic, isolated regions that usually begins revolts or revolutions. So the Syrian Great Revolt against French occupation came from the three locations that are far away from the city backbone of the country, meaning Deir ez-Zor in the northeast, Suwaida in the southeast, and the coast mountains where the Alawites were. And this alliance between the, quote unquote, Bedouins, like me, as they say, nomadic peoples of Deir ez-Zor, and the Druze, who are also, by the way, Bedouin, of Suwaida, and the Alawites of the coast are what led to the Syrian revolt and kicking out the French in 1942, and Syria becoming the first independent country at the end of World War II through revolt against colonialism. So what we saw is that the West is attempting to create a wedge between the Bedouins, and every Arabic person comes from a Bedouin origin, meaning a nomad, and the Druze population in Suwaida, their alliance is crucial to defense of the country against occupation or fragmentation. And this happened in stages. We saw how the Deir ez-Zor was stripped of all of its resources, and the Americans looted the gas, oil, cotton, and wheat of Deir ez-Zor, impoverished the dairy population, and destroyed their two main cities, Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa, and expelled them into homelessness. And then we saw how the Alawites in the coast, the other pillar of revolutionary base in the country, being raped and pillaged in the open for months after the collapse of the Assad government in Damascus. And finally, the last pillar of Syrian revolutionary thought in Suwaida is now being punished and isolated and raped, pillaged, and so forth, to destroy that base and to kill any memory of this internal cohesion in the country that causes it to be sovereign.
You asked an incredibly insightful question about in that interview with Ms. Hamza, and you asked something that I discuss all the time, and that is, you talked about the power of language and terms. And, I say the adage all the time, the power to define is the power to control. And you asked Ms. Hamza, how does she see the performance of what is called resistance media in the region, talking about the battle for words and keywords? And so, first of all, I wanted you to see I actually did watch the interview. And secondly, talk about why you felt that was an important question to ask and how that relates to where we are today.
Well, the most important part of a colonialism process for the power that wants to colonize is not the physical colonization. It is actually the mental colonization.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the mental colonization is to set terms of discussion. What words do we use? These are going to be the limitations of the discourse. And so we have to always be very conscious when engaging a discussion on colonial issues, whether it's Palestine or other places, to look at what are the buzzwords and the keywords that the enemy, the colonizer, is repeating over and over, just to have this psychological trigger effect after years of using the same term. So let's say the word terrorism, when it's used now after decades of having all those images of Arabs and Muslims associated with this word, whenever it is used, then it's clear that now any of the audience in the West that sees hears the words being used, immediately psychologically imagines an Arab or a Muslim. So we have to fight.
Hang on one second to that, and while you try to fix your light, and to that point, a key example of that domestically is Donald Trump sending immigrants that he has detained to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And you use the word terrorism. Americans equate Guantanamo Bay with terrorists. And he has been saying very clearly that the undocumented workers that are coming in the country or that are here, he has been calling them terrorists. So when he rounds them up and sends them to Guantanamo, there's less resistance because people equate Gitmo with terrorism. Therefore, these folks that Donald Trump has rounded up, ergo, they must be terrorists.
Yes. And look, when I was talking to Lillian in that interview, we were discussing specifically how the Zionists like to use the word Bedouin when they're talking about Palestinians that are living in the desert of the Naqab in the south of historical Palestine. And this is to, not use the term Palestinian and to also create them as if they are a separate category. Similarly, when they talk about Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel, they don't call them Palestinians, they call them Arabs. Mm-hmm. And this is, again, to denote with all that propaganda that they put over the last 80 years, that somehow the Palestinians that are inside what becomes the Zionist state are invaders from outside Palestine. Okay, and finally, this word Druze, again, they don't refer to the Zionists, they don't refer to Druze Palestinians and Druze Syrians and Druze as Arabs. They always separate them and call them just Druze to create them as if they are separate from the rest of their society. And thus, we have to always, number one, refuse to use the terms that our enemy forces us to in these discussions, and also create terms for discussions and parameters ourselves that force our enemy to play in that field. And this is very crucial in the building of identity that is counter to this identity that the Zionists want us to adopt.
I want to try to connect a couple of dots here, so please be patient with me. Syrian leader Ahmed Al Sharah, he had a $10 million bounty on his head when his name was Abu Muhammad al-Julani. As al-Julani, he was the emissary of Islamic State founder Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in 2011. And the United States, I believe, removed the bounty off of his head once he was determined to be able to be used as an asset of the United States in taking over Syria. So I hadn't thought about this, but so speak to that as you talk about what's being done to the Unitary Muslims. He's the one, I believe, that's at the head of all of this.
Yes, definitely. And obviously, we don't know clearly what is the origin of al-Julani. His name that is being now utilized in Western media is fabricated. Al Sharah clan in South Syria, all of them, came out in media saying they don't know who he is, or he doesn't belong to their clan. Therefore, it is very, very possible that this is an Arabized Zionist, just like previous spies like Cohen in the 1960s that almost became the Minister of Defense in Syria. And then
just like Netanyahu, whose last name is Milikowski.
Exactly. So this is, also the current Minister of Defense of Syria under the HTS government is a Turkish citizen. There's, again, no record of him or his family in the country. So much of the intelligence services that are part of the Western Empire have now ministers that are Arabized, Syrianized, who are not Syrian. And look, it's clear that the West would have even accepted Hitler and his legitimacy and appointed him the emperor of whatever countries he may have ethnically cleansed and genocided if he didn't attack London, if he didn't attack France, if he just went and genocided Slavic peoples, Arabs, Africans, and Asians, they would have actually crowned him as one of their historic leaders. So this is not a surprise to us. The only people that are accused of terrorism by Western elite are those who fight against Western domination, even if they were the most democratic and humanist, like, let's say, what's his name, Salvador Allende in Chile, that they killed on September 11, 1972. So, and if you are the most vicious most genocidal leader on the planet currently, as Netanyahu is, you are greeted as a Democrat because you are doing the killing in the name and to the benefit of Western imperialism. So there's no such thing as human rights, and terrorism is a malleable title that the West uses specifically to those who it cannot control and do not use their terrorism in the service of the Western Empire.
As you were talking about the Arabization of names, and I mentioned Netanyahu's family name is actually Milikowski. They're from Poland. Golda Meir, her birth name is Mabovich, and Golda Mabovich, and she's from Russia. She's a Russian. She's not Arab. She wasn't Arab. She wasn't. So anyway, just another data point in terms of the Arabization of names. Okay, so now let me connect these dots. So Ahmed Al Sharah, the name of the current Syrian leader, again had a $10 million bounty on his head. The CIA put a $10 million bounty on his head. Now the U.S. government has put a $50 million bounty on the head of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. And Marco Rubio, Lil Marco, says that since 2020, Maduro has strangled democracy and grasped at power in Venezuela. He claimed to have won the election in 2024, failed to present any evidence he prevailed. The U.S. has refused to recognize him as the winner. Strangled democracy. So I just connect the dots in that the United States puts a $10 million bounty on the head of the emissary of the Islamic State founder Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who I thought, Laith, at one point was supposed to be an enemy of the United States, and then removes that bounty when he becomes or seems to now be a valued U.S. asset, and then turns around and puts a bounty, a $50 million bounty on the head of the democratically elected leader in Venezuela. Help me understand this, Laith. I need a greater mind than mine to provide some clarity here.
Well, I for a while now, I have been thinking, why hasn't Iran and or the Iranian judiciary put a award for the capture, dead or alive, of Israeli officials? And I think they have the right to do so, since it's now normalized such things. And so I hope that somebody would do that. That's one thing. The other is that it's for anybody that wants to understand what was the job of Al-Julani and ISIS in Iraq. Their main job was, number one, to kill as many Muslim Sunni religious leaders and destroy as many Muslim Sunni mosques that are not Wahhabi as possible, because the vast majority of the Iraqi Sunni religious leadership was Sufi, meaning mystic. And my great-great-great-grandfather from my mother's side is Sheikh Abdul Qadir Al-Kailani, who is the founder of the Sufi mystic school in Islam. And, there's a huge shrine for him in Baghdad that ISIS tried to blow up, by the way. And the targeting of all of the Sufi religious preachers in the country opened the space for the Wahhabis to try to control the Sunni population once it's detached from its history in Iraq. And that's been the ploy, as we saw happen in Syria, before targeting the Alawites, the Christians, the Druze, what have you in Syria. The main target in the beginning of ISIS was also the Sunni Sufi leadership. And the vast majority of Sunnis in the planet are actually Sufi, not Muslim Brotherhood, not Wahhabi. And this is where the only way that the Saudis can control Islam, Sunni Islam globally, is to kill their opponents who preach love and mysticism in Islam. So looking at Maduro now being a target of this $50 million award, I mean, I also wonder, why does Venezuela not reply in similar manner? There should be awards put by Venezuela on people that target the country, whether they're American or not. American officials should be on this list. I mean, there's a lot of homeless people, a lot of people with terminal illnesses and major debts for their medical bills in the United States that would love to collect an award on taking out one of these American officials that are committing genocides around the world. Maybe the Venezuelan state or some other state will resort to this at some point, and I think there will be a lot of takers for these awards if they're offered for the heads of Western genocidal leaders.
A final question for you. Ali Akbar Velayati, senior advisor to Iran's supreme leader, warned a few days ago that the proposed Zan Zan Corridor is a geopolitical scheme, quote, pursued as a cover for broader projects led by the U.S., Israel, NATO, and pan-Turkic movements. For those who don't know, there's now an agreement that has been brokered between Azerbaijan and Armenia to allow for this 27-mile corridor that is on the border of Iran. And many believe that, well, it's being promoted as a commercial territory. It's going to allow for the development of oil and gas, but many believe that actually it's just the United States militarizing that space, bringing in private military contractors, and that they're preparing and they're going to use this space to prepare an attack on Iran. And from what I understand, in the last Israeli invasion of Iran, drones were launched from this space. Laith Marouf.
Yeah, look, there's a bigger even threat on a global scale when we think about Russia's weakest point. Russia's weakest point is not the border with Europe and or Ukraine. Russia's weakest point is its belly, the Turkic Central Asian countries that have cultural expanse in all of Central Russia and Eastern Russia that is mainly populated by Turkic peoples also. So the idea that the Americans have is to revive this pan-Turkic movement. If Turkey is not allowed to revive its Ottoman heydays by ruling the Arabs, because there's other good house slaves for the United States in Arab countries, like the Saud family or the Qatar, the Nayan family or what have you in the Emirates. So they are not going to allow Turkey, even though they want it to serve them even better, they wouldn't allow it to control much of the Arabic world. So the way to destabilize Russia, and this is not even talking about Iran yet, is to create this corridor of Turkic nationalism or pan-nationalism emanating from Turkey through Azerbaijan across the Caspian Sea into Central Asia, where all the Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, all of those Central Asian countries are. And that will, number one, if it's successful And the United States has been trying to do this for 30 years now, since the collapse of the Soviet Union. If it's successful, then it can cut all the trade between China, Russia, and Iran and the rest of the world eventually. So, and will destabilize half of Russia geographically if that spills into the Turkic populations in the central and eastern parts of Russia. So this is on the bigger scale. The immediate result of this corridor being controlled by the United States is cutting off Iran from Russia, cutting it off from Armenia, and therefore Georgia and Russia. And that's now forces any trade between Iran and Russia to go through the Caspian Sea, which is a much more controlled situation. There's also territorial waters of Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan on the others, between the territorial waters of Russia and Iran. So you could see how that could lead to effects on trade through the Caspian Sea between Russia and Iran. The implications are endless. And this is one of the more strategic, I think, failures of Russia, above and beyond the failure in Syria, to control this situation for the last 10 years. It was building up to this point, and Russia constantly appeased Turkey on the back of Iran, and also Russia wasn't combative enough with the collaborationist class in Armenia that were harming Armenia's own territorial integrity in order to appease the United States. Armenia, by the way, is right now 10% its actual real size because of the Armenian plateau being genocided and 90% of the Armenians being killed at the hand of the Kurdish militias at the orders of Turkey's nationalist army at the end of World War I. So this is mind-boggling, of course, to see how Armenia completely bowed down to America and harmed its very little remaining of its own historic territory to get to the favor of the White House.
So quickly, in terms of the bowing down, were the presidents of Armenia and Azerbaijan, were they just paid off? What was their inducement or their interest? Was it national interest or was it personal interest?
Well, for Armenia, clearly the elite of Armenia were paid off. There was, almost a 20-year program of color revolutions and what have you to destabilize the country, and all that NGO money and EU money that came into trying to dissuade Armenia to shift to the West instead of the East. But the vast majority of Armenians, saw what happened in Syria. They understand there were Armenian Syrians in the millions that had to suffer that. And there was a lot of demonstrations against the collaboration of the Armenian political class with the West. But Russia, I don't think, invested enough in this movement against the Westernization of Armenia, and we see the failure. As for Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan has been, for the last 30 years, already collaborating with the Zionists since almost the collapse of the Soviet Union. And this is also, I believe, against the will of the people of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has been ruled by a dynasty family since the collapse of the Soviet Union. The current president is the son of the president before, and they only survived, in their mind, by collaborating with the West and the Zionists. And the population of Azerbaijan is mainly Shia, but there's that contradiction of being Shia, but also Turkic, not Persian, okay, in language. So there's this, Azerbaijan is like a border conflicting culture that flips side to side throughout history. This is his story.
And final point here by Tory Verdon 3692, Professor Marandi reports that Iran forces are doubling by the border, won't allow foreign intervention. I have not heard, and I'm not saying this to challenge or Tory Verdon, I haven't heard Marandi say that, but I have read a number of reports that Iran has sent forces to the border for that purpose.
Yes, I mean, this is not only Professor Marandi, but it is clear that Iran is doing this. This is a very rugged territory in the north with Armenia and Azerbaijan. So it's very easy to infiltrate, let's say. So there's also, as you mentioned earlier, much of the attacks on Iran during the 12-day war were coming through Azerbaijani airspace, Armenian and Turkish airspace from that corner. So Iran is, the biggest losses for their air defense systems and targeting and so on were there. So clearly Iran has been ramping up the defensive lines with the borders with Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. The only challenge, I think, land-wise could come from there. The Pakistani military will not, for instance, no matter what the US does to them, will not invade Iran, nor the Afghanistan would do so. The Gulf countries wouldn't. Iraq, there will be a civil war before there will be an invasion from Iraq. So the only places that are clearly 100% at the hands of the West and in the Zionists are totally infiltrated in are Azerbaijan and Turkey, and therefore this is the most dangerous border that Iran has to protect.
Laith Marouf, my brother, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly, greatly appreciate that analysis. Folks, if you get a chance, I strongly suggest you watch Wartime Cafe, which you can find at freepalestine.video. Freepalestine.video. You can see installments of Wartime Cafe and the other segments as well, but Wartime Cafe is my favorite. So with that, man, thank you. Be safe, and look forward to having you back.
See you soon, Wilmer.
Take care. Folks, as always, I got to thank my guest, Laith Marouf, for joining us today. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. New episode tomorrow, and that episode will be with Brother Ajamu Baraka. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about is Donald Trump taking over the D.C. police force, and what are the broader national implications of that act. Can you say martial law? Follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. Why? Because this is rhetoric-free podcasting. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful, wonderful remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.